Thank you, everybody, for joining back. We will continue reading Idolatry, Journey Out of Egypt by Josh Muglia. We will continue in chapter 12. This chapter is called Revelations, and the reason for this is twofold. We are going to have a very important truth revealed to us, as well as look through the book of Revelation. But before we go forward, the things that we are about to discuss are some of the most hotly contested in the entirety of Christianity. There are dozens of debates on this matter. I simply desire to offer you a perspective that I believe has a large amount of weight to it. If you disagree with my findings, you are free to do so, as much of what we are going into are interpretive. However, I ask that you at least consider the things that I have to say and to hear the whole matter before you make up your mind. The subject that I want to examine in this chapter is the beast of the end times. In this section, I have shown that all of the idolatry from the nations are linked together, and they go all the way back to the Tower of Babel and the unholy trinity of Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz, which their story has continuously changed as the true God and his prophecies have come to fruition to mock and to steal from our God. I have shown you that the RCC has instituted the worship of Satan and the Antichrist and is responsible for most of the world falling into idolatry. Now, I want to show that the identity of the RCC is none other than the beast spoken of in Revelation. And to begin this study, we will go all the way back to the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel, there are two dreams that Daniel ends up interpreting, and the first one is found in chapter 2. Daniel 2, 31 through 35. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And you watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and it broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, and the silver, and the gold were crushed together, and they became like chaff for the summer threshing floor. The wind carried them away, so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So we see the statue or image, and the first thing to realize is that an image or a statue made up of metal in the likeness of man perfectly constitutes what an idol would be. And in fact, in the very next chapter, Nebuchadnezzar sets up a giant image of gold for all the people to worship and to bow down to. And this giant idol would have no doubt been made in the image of one of the pagan sun gods that they worshipped, or in the image of the king himself. In fact, he might have gotten inspiration for this great image from the dream he had. Now, this image that Nebuchadnezzar saw was made up of multiple kingdoms, as was revealed later, but each kingdom still fit inside and enforced the same image. It was not 4 or 5 separate images that all looked different. No, it was one consistent image with multiple kingdoms represented within it. It was one idol carried along by multiple kingdoms. So Daniel actually gives us the meaning of this dream, and he explains it to us. So let's look at it before we make any other notes. Daniel 2, 37 through 44. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, he has given them all into your hand. and he has made you a ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which should rule over all of the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. Like iron that crushes, the kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with the ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. And as you saw iron mixed with the clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all of these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So Daniel clearly explains for us that this singular image is made up of multiple materials that were meant to represent multiple kingdoms. He even gives us the identity of the first kingdom. Now, before we go into depth into this, we also need to understand that there was another dream and in Daniel 7 that speaks of the same thing that Daniel himself had had. In Daniel 7, 2 through 8. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. 4 great beasts came up from the sea, and sea always represents people, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, and he had eagle's wings. And I watched until its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And a man's heart was given to it. Suddenly, another beast, a second, like a boar, and it was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise and devour much flesh. And after this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and exceedingly strong, and it had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the root. And there, in this horn, were the eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. And we know these we know were also about kingdoms, because we are told so when Daniel receives the interpretation. In Daniel 7:15 through 22. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by, and I asked him the truth of all this. So he told me, and he made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts, which are 4 kings that will arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom, and possess the kingdom forever and ever and ever. And then I wished to know the truth of these 4 beasts, the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its nails of bronze, which devoured, broke into pieces, and trampled the residue with its feet. The 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth that spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. And I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. There is much more relevant text in the rest of the chapter to explore, but we will set that aside for a moment. Interestingly, we see that there are 5 materials in the image: gold, silver, bronze, and iron mingled with clay, but we only see 4 beasts. The 4th beast is different from all of the beasts before it, but we know that it had 10 horns. And one more scripture section to compare, and then we will go into interpretations. Revelation 13, 1 through 3. I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw the beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast that I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So let's put this all together. Daniel 7 tells us that there is 4 beast kingdoms that will arise in the earth. And Daniel 2 tells us that there is one image made up of 5 different materials. Excuse me. All right. So Daniel 2 tells us that there is one image made up of 5 materials, and explains the interpretation that there are 4 kingdoms that will arise, but the last one will have 2 phases to it. One of just iron, and one of iron and clay. And we also know that this will take place chronologically, because we are told that Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, the head, is the first, and that all the other kingdoms will arise after it. So this would indicate that this final kingdom would undergo some kind of drastic change partway through its reign, thus being 5 materials but only 4 kingdoms. More interestingly still is with the 4th beast. The first 3 are their own separate entities, but the 4th kingdom, according to Revelation, is a bit of a Frankenstein. The first beast was like a lion, the second beast was like a bear, and the 3rd beast was a leopard. The 4th beast, however, was like the leopard, but had the head of a lion, the feet of a bear. In other words, it was a beast made up of all the parts of the other beasts, or a kingdom made up of parts of all of the other kingdoms. So we are given the identity of the head of the statue as well as the first beast. The golden head was the kingdom of Babylon, which reigned until 539 BC. The lion also represents Babylon, and in fact, the official symbol representing Babylon was the golden lion of Babylon. Further, we know that the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar himself, actually underwent a point in time where he became like a wild beast. But after 7 years, he came to his senses, and it changed his heart completely towards God. This signified that the wings had been plucked off, and being made to stand on 2 feet, having the heart of a man given to it. Further, Babylon was one of the most richly abundant kingdoms to ever exist, and they had an abundance of gold, part of the which was taken from Israel when they went into captivity. The spoils were so abundant that when the kings who conquered Babylon came in, he had no problem giving Israel back their gold, because there was plenty to go around. In Ezra 1, 7 through 11, King Cyrus also brought out the articles of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Jerusalem and had put in the temple of his gods. And Cyrus, the king of Persia, brought them out by the hand of Mithridath, the treasurer, and counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. This is the number of them: 30 gold platters, 1,000 silver platters, 29 knives, 30 gold basins, 410 silver basins of a similar kind, and 1,000 other articles. All of the articles of gold and silver were 5,400. All of these Sheshbazzar took with the captives who were brought from Babylon to Jerusalem. This would be why the gold was the metal representing Babylon. This passage also lets us know who the next kingdom was who came after Babylon. This was the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. And if you notice, King Cyrus of Persia was the one dividing up the spoils of Babylon. The kingdom of Media and Persia were two separate kingdoms that decided to join together. Thus, the chest and the arms joined together. The Medes and the Persians ruled from 539 BC till 311 BC. And this kingdom of the Medes and Persians was a massive kingdom, consisting of an estimated 2.5 million troops. This kingdom definitely had the strength of a bear. Further, the beast was raised up on one side. This was because in 553 BC, Persia actually conquered the Medes, but treated them as equals, so it was more of a partnership. This is an excerpt from the website called michaelsarin.com. Thus were the Medes subject to their close kin, the Persians. In the new empire, they retained a prominent position. In honor and war, they stood next to the Persians. Their court ceremony was adopted by the new sovereigns, who in the summer months resided in Ecbatana, and many noble Medes were employed as officials, satraps, and generals. So we see why the bear was raised up on one side, because technically one side was higher than the other, but both were working together. And furthermore, we see that the bear had 3 ribs in its mouth. The Medes and Persians ended up conquering 3 main kingdoms on its rise to power: Libya, Babylon, and Egypt. Thus, it had 3 ribs in its mouth, and it devoured much flesh. Lastly, the Persians were famous the world over for their craftsmanship and silverwork, as they made beautiful weapons, armor, decorations, and furniture from silver. You can see that, to this day, as Persian silver work is some of the highest quality. Thus, silver is the metal symbolizing this kingdom. The next kingdom, the waist of bronze, the leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings, is the kingdom that conquered the Medes and the Persians. And this is namely the Greeks under Alexander the Great, who reigned from 311 to 168. Alexander had only about 35,000 troops, but he conquered all the other nations and rose to power in an astoundingly short time, being small but fast. The leopard is a perfect representation of the kingdom of Greece. Further, the Greek army had 4 generals who divided and conquered. Thus, 4 wings to carry the beast to wherever it needed to go. Alexander the Great also divided his kingdom up into 4 when he died, giving each of his 4 sons a portion of the kingdom, thus the 4 heads of the kingdom. Lastly, the breastplate of the Grecian army were made of bronze as well as many other things. Thus, that period of time is commonly known as the Bronze Age, matching the waist of bronze. Greece was conquered thereafter by the 4th kingdom, the kingdom of Rome. Rome was astoundingly powerful, and with their weapons and breastplates of iron, they crushed all the enemies that were in their paths. Thus, that time was known as the Roman Iron Age. They were a bit of a hodgepodge, as they had a unique method of growth. And this is a quote taken from khanacademy.org. The Romans did not set out any deliberate plan to build an empire. Instead, Rome expanded as it came into conflict with surrounding city-states, kingdoms, and empires, and had to create ways to incorporate these new territories and populations. The Romans did not try to turn everyone they conquered into a Roman. For the most part, the cities and religions that came under Roman control were allowed to maintain their existing cultural and political institutions. The only major requirement that Rome imposed on its defeated enemies was that they were to provide soldiers for a military campaign. In the ancient world, military victory usually meant a share of the loot taken from the conquered. So, participating on the winning side of a conflict offered incentives to Rome's new allies. So Rome truly was a hodgepodge of all the other nations put into one, same as the church. Thus, it trampled the residual kingdoms and territories, while also being made up of multiple parts of other beasts. I also want to mention quickly that the method of the Roman Catholicism conversion mirrors that of the Roman military practices. Rome would come up upon people and take them over. They would allow them to keep their culture, but to take on the name of Rome. They would then supply Rome with soldiers for their campaign. And the RCC comes upon a culture, takes it over, allowing it to retain its pagan practices, just rebranding it, and coming under the title of Catholic. These cultures then supply money and tithes and offerings to the Vatican. It is a dead ringer. Now, one important thing I decided to wait until now to mention is that we are told explicitly that this particular beast, the fourth beast, will persist until the end. And the beast in Revelation is clearly seen at end times. That means that whatever kingdom the fourth beast would continue and be a ruling power in the world until the eternal kingdom is established, the kingdom of Christ. And the stone that the builders reject would shatter the image as the final act of the age. This means that the fourth beast has been present with us for the past 2,000 years and is present today and will be until the end. This idea is mirrored in the image of the statue. If you look at the basic proportions of the human body, the head, or according to Hebrew tradition, the head and neck, it would account for a relatively small amount of the human body, perhaps 1/6 or 1/7, depending on the person. The reign of Babylon was respectably a good length of time. And as we know it, Israel's captivity happened around 600 BC, which means Babylon was around for at least 61 years. Although we can surmise that Babylon was around quite a while before that, as Babylon was powerful enough to conquer Israel by the time that they did. And evidence suggests that they were around before. We can comfortably assume that the reign of Babylon was probably about 100 to 150 years or so. Thereafter, the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, which reigned 228 years, between 539 and 311 BC. This is consistent with the human anatomy, as the chest and arms would make up a larger portion of the body. Thereafter came the Grecian Empire, which lasted a relatively short amount of time, from 311 to 168, which is consistent with the relatively small portion of the human body that is the waist. Lastly, we have the legs and feet, and anatomically speaking, the legs account for about half of the overall height of a body. If length of time is comparable to anatomy, then the legs would easily be the longest portions of time. This, too, is consistent with this kingdom being the last kingdom before Christ takes his world back from Satan and destroys the image. All of these things point unequivocally to the fact that the final kingdom, the Frankenbeast, made up of multiple other beasts, would be the final kingdom ruling until the end times. And this, of course, is Rome. You may argue that Rome only ruled from 476 AD when it fell, which was a very long time anyways, which was 644 years, although some sources claim it was much longer and over 1,000 years. Now compare that to other kingdoms, but Rome never really disappeared, did it? Indeed, Rome fell, but it just reformed itself into the Holy Roman Empire, which officially lasted from 800 AD to 1806, which was another 1,000 years. And the church still persists even to this day. You may not think that they are ruling, but the truth is that the RCC is the origin and overseer of the groups such as the Jesuits, Freemasons, Knight Templar, and many more. They rule the vast majority of the world from the shadows, and most have no idea. Please look into these things for yourself. Check out the mysterious entity known as the City, consisting of the Vatican, Washington, D.C., and the City of London. Notice also that the Pope is honored and venerated by pretty much every ruler of the world, and even at the UN, the Pope is given special honor. The Roman Empire has undergone a dramatic change, being broken up from a solid iron rule to being broken and mingled with clay. But it has continued throughout the last 2,000 years and is alive and well. They are particularly weak in the religious face that they put forward, but also partially still of iron, in that they rule the nations from the shadows. Well, what about the 7 heads of the beast? At the time that John had received this vision, where it was revealed that the beast had 7 heads, he said this: "Here is the mind that has wisdom." The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There's also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, and the other has not yet come. When he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. First of all, Rome was famous for having 7 hills, and this is common knowledge. We also see the woman riding on the beast, but we will talk about her later on. Secondly, when this was penned, Rome had undergone 5 types of ruling government: kings, republic, decemviri, triumvirate, and dictators. Now, dictators such as Julius Caesar were merely that. They dictated what everybody was to do, and they did it. The 5 heads of government had been: one type was active at the time of John's vision, which was emperors. Emperors differed from dictators, as Rome had gotten so big that it needed multiple kings to keep it afloat. King Herod is an example of one of these kings. However, they all had one king over them, which was the emperor. The kings were subservient to the emperor, thus the 6th head of the government or kingship were the emperors. The final head, the 7th, came in the form of the Pope, who came up after the fall of Rome, and he reigned all throughout the reign of the Holy Roman Empire. 7 heads of the government have ruled this beast. In 1806, Napoleon came on the scene, and he conquered the majority of Europe. Napoleon personally saw to it that the popes were deposed and, in fact, kidnapped some of them. This was described in this passage in Revelation 13:3. I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, but it was healed. And all the world marveled and followed after the beast. The head or rulership of the Pope was indeed mortally wounded by Napoleon. But in 1929, Benito Mussolini signed the Lateran Treaty, which gave the Vatican back its sovereignty, reestablishing the rule of the Roman Catholic Church, the deadly wound that was healed. This also accounts for this passage, 17:11 of Revelation. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th head of and is of the 7 heads and is going to perdition. The papacy being reestablished separated itself from the previous papacy. being one of the 7 forms of rulership, but also the 8th. The head wound was miraculously healed. Now we also know that the beast had 10 horns, but a little horn came up among them and rooted 3 of them out. At the outset of the Holy Roman Empire, during the rise of the papacy, there were 10 kingdoms or kings at that time who were able to either become a part of the Holy Roman Empire or to resist it and be decimated. They were Germany, France, Switzerland, Portugal, and the Heruli, which was destroyed by the Roman Empire in 493, Spain, England, and the Ostrogoths, which were also destroyed by Rome, Italy, and the Vandals. Now you can see all of their original names. So during the rise of the papacy, these 10 kingdoms were ruling, but 3 of them were uprooted and destroyed when they decided to go up against the papacy. The 10 horns of the Roman Empire, 3 of which were uprooted and destroyed when the little horn, the Pope, came up among them. We are also given these descriptions of the little horn. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, and he shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change the times and law. Now we know Rome was the primary persecutors of the followers of Christ, and we know that this trend was continued by the papacy through things like the Crusades and the Inquisition. Thus, they have throughout history persecuted the saints of the Most High. The papacy also changed times in the form of causing the vast majority of the world to come under the pagan Gregorian calendar that worshipped the false gods and Roman emperors. Rome has also changed many of the laws. Take, for example, the altering of the 10 Commandments, changing the Sabbath, instituting pagan holidays. Lastly, the Pope has assuredly spoken pompous words against God. Pope Ferreris, Ecclesiastical Dictionary: the Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but, as it were, God, and the vicar, or replacement or stand-in of God. Catholic Record in 1923. Catholic Church is above the Bible. This transference of the Sabbath observance is proof of that fact. Pope Leo XIII in 1894. We hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty. So, if those aren't pompous words against the Most High, I don't know what are. We also have these descriptions. Daniel 11:36-39. Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. He shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper until the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall neither regard God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall exalt himself above all. But in their place he shall honor a god of fortresses, and a god which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, and precious stones and pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and divide the land for gain. The papacy has surely exalted and magnified himself above every god in claiming that he is God, thus speaking blasphemies against the Most High. The papacy also enjoys a position of enormous wealth and prosperity, and all signs point to that trend continuing until Christ interrupts this impostor. The papacy does not regard the God of his fathers, as he has replaced God with the sun god. He honors these false pagan gods with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things, and he can act impudently against the strongest fortresses because he does so behind the scenes in the name of a pagan god. He has advanced the worship and recognition of this pagan god, and he helps to set up rulers and divide the land. The Pope is also forbidden from marrying and having relations with women. Thus, he has no regard for any woman that desire him. Remember at the beginning of this chapter when I mentioned that while all the kingdoms had different metals, that they were in unison, forming the same idol. Now the Roman Catholic Church now carries the torch of that pagan sun god worship, and it has transferred from culture to culture from the time of Babylon to Persia, to Greece, to Rome, and even long before, and in fact brings together all of these pagan gods into unison in the form of Catholicism. Further, we know that the Antichrist will seek to unite the world and unite religions, and the papacy has actively spoken in the UN and from many other platforms calling for unity in the world government and has called for a one world government. Pope Francis, in particular, has called for a single ruler to oversee the nations and to help end world hunger and strife. He's also been actively setting up Chrislam, which is the hybrid religion of Christianity and Islam and also Judaism, as well as claiming that all roads lead to God. Beyond that, the Ostrogoths were destroyed in 538 AD, as stated before, which was when the papacy truly rose to full power. Napoleon officially imprisoned Pope Pius VI in 1798, and the mortal wound was dealt. The amount of years between these events, the solidification of the papacy in 538 until the fall of the papacy in 1798, were exactly 1,260 years. I still believe that the 1,260 days or 42 months or 3.5 years, which are all the exact same amount of time, according to the Hebrew calendar, are going to be literal period of days. But you cannot deny that these events being exactly 1,260 years apart is more than mere coincidence. The Antichrist will reign for 1,260 days, and the papacy originally reigned for 1,260 years. One last thing to consider is this, and I already explained the 7 heads as governmental heads. However, one more interesting factoid is that there have been officially 8 popes since the reestablishment of the papacy. We have Pius XI and the 12th, and John the 23rd, Paul VI, John Paul I, John Paul II, Benedict the 15th, and Francis. And what is truly interesting about all of this is that technically, according to multiple sources, Pope Benedict the 15th never officially passed the papacy to Francis. And many within Catholicism still claim that he is not actually a real pope. And if this is the case, the next pope that we see may be the final one, being an 8 of the 7. All of these facts paint to a rather unanswerable conclusion that the Roman Catholic Church is in fact the beast of the book of Revelation and the seat, at least at first, of the impostor vicar of Christ, the Antichrist. Every prophecy nails down this beast perfectly. There isn't a single prophecy that it doesn't fit like a glove for Rome. The question then becomes, how will the Pope get Islam or Hinduism or Judaism or Christians to follow him? That's already beginning now. The Pope is doing these things as we speak. This mission represents the full-time mission of the Vatican, and they are doing it all in the name of peace. 1 Thessalonians 5:3, for when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. The Pope is actively uniting all the religions in the name of peace. Naturally, though, there will be some who resist this movement. How will they be convinced? 2 Thessalonians 2:9-10. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. So lying signs and wonders. And some apocryphal text even suggests that the Antichrist will descend from the sky and be able to command the sun. And this sounds impossible, but so do most of the events from Revelation. But we choose to believe those. So what if the Antichrist is a giant, akin to King Og, who is like a cedar tree? Have you ever seen the giant golden throne sitting in the middle of the Vatican? Who could make war with a man like that? We don't even really know what the Antichrist will appear as or do. And if the Antichrist can perform enough signs and wonders, will there be anyone who doubts him? Only those who truly know and love the truth, and these will be the one he hates. The Muslims will say the Imam, the Jews will say the Messiah, the Buddhists will say the Enlightened One, and many Christians will say the Christ. Anyone who does not buy into the deception will be universally hated. Men will believe that by killing those who oppose the Antichrist, they will be doing a service to God. This has all been foretold. The Vatican is the last empire, the beast that is made of pieces of the other beasts, the iron mingled with clay, and will be destroyed when the stone that the builders rejected come and smashes the image of idolatry. The beast is revealed. Thank you guys for joining in reading Revelations of this book, Idolatry, Journey Out of Egypt by Josh Muglia. If you like this book so far, please hit the follow button. I'll be returning in just a moment to continue reading this book. Thank you for joining.